Do you want to grow your podcast, connect with your audience, and even start making some of that sweet, sweet podcasting money? Well, of course you do. So today, Stephen Gould reveals how he built something incredible from his niche. He's going to share practical tips that every podcaster can use. Today is a big one. Welcome to 2025.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? Thank you. I truly do mean that. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the year 2025 of Podtastic Audio. We made it, man. We made it to a brand new year. And this show, Podtastic Audio here, was designed and created to help you and other podcasters just like you make an amazing show for your audience. And one amazing tool to help you make that happen is Riverside.fm. Today's episode is brought to you by Riverside, the platform I trust to make Podtastic Audio sound amazing. You know, Happy New Year and welcome to 2025. Today's guest, well, it was recorded with Riverside, and they sounded like they were right here next to me. Riverside's AI-enhanced one-click video editor makes editing a breeze, silence remover, captions, magic clips, all done in seconds. And their multi-track editor lets you fine-tune every detail as if you are a podcasting pro. Kick off the best podcasting year yet. You can use my promo code for 15% off. That is promo code Podtastic off any paid plan. Get started with something amazing today with Riverside.fm. So not that long ago, I get an email through my website. And if you want to email me there too, you can at podtasticaudio.com. There's a contact form right there. But the email reads as this. It says, "Hey, brother, fellow podcaster here. Been listening to your show, and it's been a big help to keeping me motivated. Started my show in 2018, and I've been trying to take it more seriously the last couple of years. It's a grind, man. Get around 25 to 30,000 downloads a month and some nice extra money from it. Almost enough to pay the mortgage. Been trying to game plan on how to take it to the next level. I have absolute faith in the show, and I just need to feel I don't do a good enough job getting it out there. It's called Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts. If you're curious, it's mostly entertainment value, although it does offer some good encouragement to people in the field or thinking to be in the field. Just thought I'd shoot you a note and say I enjoy your podcast and thank you so much, from Steve Gould." Now, when I first read that, I was like, wow, that's great. I appreciate the feedback. I love feedback. We all love feedback. It's amazing when a new listener finds you and discovers your show and actually says positive things and wants to have a conversation. So we went back and forth and we're talking about downloads and the different things about podcasting and stuff like that. I'm thinking like, wow. Here's this guy is an indie podcaster, just like me, just like you, yet he's getting massive, massive download numbers, enough to actually make some serious cash from his podcast. Like, what's your secret? How are you doing it? The thing what Steve is doing with his podcast, the things that police see, his podcast is very niche. It's about police stuff, interviewing other people that are cops, officers of the law, not just in America, but all over the world, hearing their stories. So today I decided to bring on Steve onto the podcast today to share his podcasting journey. How he went from 0 downloads to like 40,000 downloads. How is he able to actually make an income from his podcast directly as an indie podcaster? How is he able to pull all that stuff off? So today we're covering what is it about having a niche podcast that makes his show so successful? how he actually overcame challenges with growing his show, because at the beginning, we always start off with 0 downloads, especially as an indie podcaster. We're not famous, so we all start off at the same level. So how was he able to take 0 and transform that into a massive, large-scale audience? How was he able to do that? And most importantly, how was he able to physically monetize his podcast, and how much money is he actually earning each month from his podcast? He's going to tell you all that stuff, all his strategies today on this episode. So being that Steve is in law enforcement, I wanted to know, is that why you decided to make a podcast about law enforcement, because you were already in it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but 4 years ago, I was actually living in Southern California. My family and I had moved cross country. I'd been in law enforcement in Massachusetts for 14 years, and we decided, we just want, like wanderlust. We're like, we lived in Mass our whole lives. We rented our house. We bought a camper. We went cross country for like 40 days and landed in Southern California. And I'd already put an application in with the background unit for the city of Los Angeles, which would be doing background investigations for LAPD. So we landed there. A month or two went by, just long enough to make it stressful, not having any income. Our Cobra health insurance was starting to get close to the end, and boom, I got an interview with LAPD backgrounds, and there I was doing backgrounds for them. And while I was there, all that to say, while I was there, I would go on lunch break and I was getting to know the unit and everybody. And I got to work with like absolute police legends. Like these guys, robbery, homicide division, 40 years. A lot of them had been in 5-6 shootouts in their career. Just wild stories from these guys, and they would tell them at lunch. And so we would sit there and eating, and I've always been a small town cop, and I'm not diminishing what small town cops deal with, because we deal with plenty. But listening to these guys from LAPD tell these stories they were almost unbelievable. It's like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And I thought, if someone could be a fly in the wall and be kind of let inside this little group and hear the madness that police officers actually have to deal with, they would definitely get a better appreciation and understanding for what the job is like and what the men and women of law enforcement have to go through. So that was I was like, and on top of that, I've always loved podcasting. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I love gear. I love everything about it. So I just needed a reason to start a podcast. And I was like, it just kind of clicked. I actually took John Lee Dumas's free course online, because I wanted to do it the right way. I reached out to people in my life and asked them, what they thought. I followed the course to a T, and yeah, it was born there. And it just so happened that I had the perfect pool of guests. 30 plus men and women who worked at one of the most prestigious and largest police departments in the country. So it just kind of worked out. I started grabbing them and doing interviews.
Nice. Now, when you have a subject matter like something like behind the scenes police type stuff, there are certain things they are not allowed to talk about because maybe open cases or things of that sort. So it's like things that have a certain time limit are things they are allowed to share or things like that. 'Cause I wouldn't know.
Oh, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like I actually, so a lot of guys, it's probably half and half, but half the people I have on are retired, which is great because every case they've had is closed. And besides that, they don't have to answer to their employer. And I'm sure you're aware, police officers are held to a higher standard in their employment because of the job we have. So you can't, there's a catch-all kind of enforceable regulation in most police departments where, how's it worded? Behavior unbecoming a police officer. So you couldn't just have an active police officer come on and just be like, just out of pocket saying stuff that was like, you know what I mean? Like that was just like, whoa, hey, that's kind of out of line or whatever. So having the retired guys come on is more fun because they can kind of like, and a lot of them worked in like the 70s or 80s when it was like, it was like the Wild West, what was going on out there. And nowadays when I have people that are active on, I always say, listen, we use a pseudonym and we don't have to name your department. Always check with your department, make sure it's cool, and just realize this is going out to the world. It's going to live on the internet.
Right.
So you got to, bring your A game. And if you're sure you can do it, I'd love to have you. And it works out 99% of the time. I did have one Maine State Police detective come on, and great guest. He started talking about a murder case. And he started talking about it early on the podcast. So this case was interwoven through the whole interview. Like I could not get rid of it if I tried. And come to find out, I get a call from him 2 days after it's posted. And he's like, hey, my sergeant heard the podcast and he said, you better ask that guy to take it down immediately because that case is still active.
Wow. That's got to be a tricky thing there because a lot of, cases are still out there, might be still active. Now, can they reopen old cases and maybe some details that the officer shared, not like saying he wanted to share, but he kind of just came out in the podcast and you let it go out there and then, somebody hears it and then the case gets reopened and maybe, lawyers get involved and everything else. And then what happens then?
I mean, it could happen. There's always cold case squads, working cases that were never solved. But with most stuff like that, these guys are only going to talk about the facts that are already known that have been publicized to the media and all that. They usually won't, like if it's a real serious investigation, they're not going to give me all the detail. That's why having closed cases or guys that are retired is great because they come on and they can just tell you everything about the case. And a lot of the stuff the guys talk about too, like I was saying, small town, I'm from a small town originally, but I've had deputies from the Midwest come on and people would never think like, oh, what do those guys even do? And then they tell you these crazy stories they go on and you're like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. Just police work in general is you just never know what to expect. So it doesn't even have to be a big high profile case. It could just be going to a really, really weird call,
Right. Speaking of weird calls, the Manhattan case going on right now as you record this with the CEO of the healthcare, When I was in New York City not that long ago, I wanted to go take a tour over to the actual murder scene. And my wife said, that's gross. Why would you want to go see that? It's like 10 blocks away. I just want to just, we're there, he's there, whatever.
All piece of history.
Yeah, for the most part, but in kind of a weird way, like I'm not super into true crime. Are you into true crime? Do you like listening to a lot of true crime podcasts?
No, what's funny? I don't listen to true crime and I don't really listen to other police podcasts either. I really get a kick out of enjoying my podcast, getting the stories out of people, but I don't consume a lot of police content. And I also don't hang out with police officers much when I'm not working, which is funny to say, but I've been on the job almost 20 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm 45. And when you're a young copper, like you're very excited about it and all your friends are cops and, the whole thing. When I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but one of the biggest suggestions I get from guests, because one of the final questions I ask is advice for new recruits. And one of the biggest things they say is make sure you have plenty of friends that are not cops. Don't get into the us versus them, just cops hanging out with cops type of thing. So I guess maybe I've overly embraced that, but yeah, I'm not big into the culture. The true crime thing, maybe you could advise me on this, Chris. When I went to label my podcast, I had really there wasn't an appropriate label to pick for it. Like I couldn't find that fit just right. And so when true crime, I think I put in society and culture first.
Okay.
But then when true crime came out, and I didn't know what it was. I just said, well, my guests talk about crimes that truly happen, so true crime.
It makes sense. It totally does. I mean, I would have picked it, I would think.
It makes sense, right? But I guess now that I've looked into what true crime is, it's much more of like an unraveling of one case over maybe a bunch of episodes. And I'm like, I wonder if people are searching and finding mine and going, hey, this isn't really true crime. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, those category things can be tricky. I know some platforms allow you to pick more than one category. I haven't really messed around with that stuff too much. I thought mine was under one category. I moved it to another category. I don't even know what it is under now, but
so maybe it doesn't matter all that much.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? It might to some people. That you always think that like just the other day, the new Superman trailer came out for the new movie, and everyone's going nuts about it. And I don't know much about the deep behind the scenes about Superman stuff, like the Superman dog. I asked legitimately, like, what's with the super dog? What's that all about?
There's a super dog?
Yeah, well, I didn't know, and then people are going, nuts over it, saying, "Oh, you don't know this is crypto from the Superman comic books and blah blah blah, all this stuff, all this deep backstory." That I was like joking, like, "What's a super dog about?" And they're taking it literally seriously because it's to them.
They're insulted.
Yes, it's their world. It's what they're super excited about. They like live and breathe this stuff. But for most people, look at it like, well, it's just a movie. Who cares? Whatever. But for some people, Comic-Con is their entire world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you think that about one thing could be like, it's no big deal, but to somebody, it really means the world to them. So you kind of have to be kind of careful with things you do say, and especially with podcasting, because I used to like review some podcasts, and I remember reviewed one, and they were like so horrible. The show was so horrible, and I basically was kind of be nice, but I said like not the greatest things about their show. Like, your show's kind of hot garbage,
Yeah.
But I mean, I think when people ask, can you please check out my show or review my show or let me know what you think about my show, what they really mean is it's great, right? Right? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, don't say a word.
Right. It's what it is. So be careful when people out there, when they say, hey, please check out my show. And you say, do you really want me to check your show out? Do you really?
Yeah.
Are you sure? but your show was fantastic, by the way. I was checking your show out when you reached out. When you reached out to me, I was kind of thrown off a little bit, but like what? So because you came to me and you reached out to me first, and I'm like, well, first I appreciate that, but then I get a lot of people hitting me up, and a lot of people who do hit me up are like fake advertisers or fake promoters, or just a lot of fake stuff out there. You gotta fish through.
I get that too, yeah.
And you kind of thinking like, well, this guy wants me to sell me this, one guy sell me that. And I'm not really, I just kind of like whatever with it. But with yours, I was checking it out and I was looking it up and actually looked up your show. And I was like, well, this guy actually has a show for real. It's not just an ad or just a fake thing. It's for real. And then you were telling me some numbers about your show. And I was like, wow, this show is like literally like massive. When did you first launch the Things Please See? Like, when did you start it?
I want to say 2018 is when I first started it. And I, believe me, did not have any kind of numbers to write home about for like a long time.
And that's what it is. I think a lot of people, that's why they always say it was like the first 7 to 10 episodes, people usually quit because they think they're going to get, Joe Rogan numbers or even a quarter of Joe Rogan numbers. And then they just say, I'm not making the money with this thing. It's not going anywhere. No one's listening. And, see you later. I'm out of here. Do you recall like the first few episodes, what kind of numbers you were getting?
Yeah, I can at least recall that time frame. I remember probably the first dozen or so episodes I was getting maybe on a launch day. Like when you launch the podcast, you kind of lifts the whole boat lifts up, and then it goes back down until the next time you publish a podcast. So like I can only remember the first couple months. I can't remember the first week now. I'm thinking about it. But I remember in the first couple of months, I had a spike on a launch day, and the spike was 75. And I was out of my mind excited. I was like, damn. And really that 75 people from a podcast that has like I'm not a celebrity and it has no promotion. Someone like on a launch day, but normally that was a spike, and then it all went back down to like 20, 25. Like,
oh, the very next episode? Like the first episode was high, and then like the next episode.
Yeah, like one in the middle, like one after a couple of months was, I think my first, I was definitely getting like maybe 20s or 30s an episode when I first started for like the first couple months. And then I had a spike of like 75, and I was like, like every time to this day, when I get spikes like that, I'm like, it happened. I'm blowing up. And then it just goes right back to normal. And you're like, I actually contacted Libsyn once because I had such a big spike, and I wanted to know. And by the way, I don't know who anybody hosts with, but Libsyn is really great. This way you can actually just email their team, make a ticket, and they will email with you and they'll look into stuff. So I said, hey, I had, this was a gigantic spike. It was, I think, just shy of 4,000 downloads in one day. And that was double of what I was getting for a podcast launch. And I wrote to him, I said, what is this? Did somebody pick up the show and just, I don't know how it works, but maybe somebody indexed it and that just took all the episodes a bunch of times over. And they wrote back and they said, no, those are legitimate downloads. And I was like, well, do you think I got a mention somewhere? Did somebody mention the show? Like some cop celebrity or something? And they're like, oh, maybe. Like I never found out. I could never find why. And it went right back down. It went right back down to normal.
So is that all just, okay, we say 4,000 downloads. Was that over like a bunch of different episodes, or was just one episode took off?
It was, the episode for that day in particular was higher than normal. And then all the rest of them got bumped up too, like multiple times over.
Interesting. That's fantastic. We always try to look into our downloads and try to replicate what happened. Like you'll see one episode will shoot up and you're like, man, if I can just figure out what I did on that episode and make it happen again.
Yes.
But I know that you do a lot of guest interviews. And being that you do a lot of guest interviews, do you think that possibly one of the guests were more popular than some other guests, maybe?
It could have been, yeah. I mean, I looked at that and it wasn't like a notable, because I've had people on like Joe Kenda from Homicide Hunter from Discovery Channel came on, and like the guy who took over writing for Tom Clancy, he's a retired U.S. Marshal, he came on. So, and then like Derek Levasseur, who won Big Brother 2014, he has Crime Weekly podcast, which is millions of downloads a month. He came on, and those people all had the spike you would think. Like, okay, I'm getting their audience a little bit. But this particular day, there was nothing standoutish. I mean, the guest was fantastic, but they were not famous and had no notoriety. So that's what made it even weirder.
I do know that for a while that a lot of us indie podcasters are always thinking that if I only just get that big name guest on my show, that my numbers will just skyrocket. And to a lot of them, they're very disappointed when they find out that it doesn't always work out that way. Because for one, the guest,
short of Joe Rogan, it doesn't work.
Well, there's no guarantee the guest is even going to share the interview at all. I mean,
right.
There's no promise. A big name celebrity, you're lucky even to get them on the show, let alone share anything. Are you kidding me? So that usually doesn't work out. And then I see some people get very disappointed. I know a guy that was so excited. He was telling me about this new interview he was going to get, some big name, or not massive name, but fairly big name. And he was all excited about it. And this is years ago. And then the very next day, like the very same day it released, he was like pissed off and upset. I'm like, you just released the episode 4 hours ago. What do you expect? I mean,
I'm not rich yet. Come on.
Yeah, you gotta have to like, most episodes take at least a week or so to kind of build up some kind of traction. And then in fact, the guy didn't share it because he's too busy, doesn't care. You're lucky you got him in the first place. So
yeah,
I don't think putting all your eggs into the big name basket is a way to really boost your show. And even when you do, who is the audience there for in the first place? Are they there for you, or are they there for your guest? Like, what are they more interested in? So that's why I think doing solo episodes is a good way to kind of get your audience to pay attention more to you and less about the actual guest. And I know you were talking about solo episodes, and had you done a few of them, but I think you were curious about doing more. Is that I feel you out right there on that?
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying. Like I said, I'm a consumer of podcasts. I just like them. I find them fascinating. I love to hear what other podcasts are doing, how they built up, and what worked for them, and guys like you who have like really good tips and tricks that work. But it like I had Joe Kenda on, the Homicide Hunter. He's done a bunch of series of that, super famous in the police world. It ended up like I did some shorts with him, and one of the shorts got 850,000 views.
Wow.
Right? You know what everybody cared about in those shorts and those comments?
What's that?
More Joe Kenda, not my podcast. They were
totally.
They were just like, hey, or when are you having him on again? Let me know. Or hey, is he part of the show now? Or where's the rest of the interview? Why is this short? The guy's been interviewed 100 times. It was just tons of love for Joe, which I shared with him, which he appreciated because he's not on any social media. God bless his heart. But I saw, no joke, zero bump in my audio podcast. The initial episode, the one episode he's on does well, but besides that, I did not gain anything noticeable. I've had a steady stream of gaining listeners, but there was no spike of followers because of him, and it just made them want him to come on. They could have cared less about. I mean, the people were even like, throwing shots at me in the like, who's this guy interviewing? It was like the opposite.
Right.
So they love him. His audience loves him, and I get it. But it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't necessarily mean they care anything about me. Why would they? Now, that being said, I do have a core group of people that listen to the show, and like I reached out to you and we were chatting a little bit about the solo stuff. And I said, it just makes sense that, if people get to know you a little bit more, they're even more into your podcast. And I've shared little personal stuff along the way, like beginning of the show, I might throw something in there. I shared about having to put a dog down and stuff like that. And I get tons of emails when I share personal stuff. So I kind of surveyed the audience to see like, hey, if I was going to do extra content, and also as a shield against like, if I don't have an interview, I can't put nothing up. Because if there's a hole, it screws up my downloads. So I want to be able to do something. And a lot of them in the top 2 was share more of your personal stuff. And I was shocked. I'm like, oh, okay. But where do you go from there? Because I'm not, like I was saying, I have an entertainment podcast, and my audience, a lot of the audience are other cops who would be considered experts as much as I am in law enforcement. So I can't really give them any like technical stuff to do with police work that they don't already know or that they would even care about. So my solo episodes kind of have to be a little bit more creative. Like I'm going to have to, like, I thought about, what about the history of police equipment? Because I think that's fascinating. Like the Billy Club, where'd that come from? Who used that? What they used to call it? How does using it change over the years?
Yeah, poor Billy is where the guy.
Right. So like, I was like, maybe that. And then like, I was thinking maybe have my wife come on, because she's been on my podcast, my old podcast back in the day, and people loved her. She's got a great voice and she's very smart, and she could talk about what it's like in our household being married to a cop. Like that might be interesting, just as like, just little one-off episodes, maybe 10, 20 minutes long. I've been thinking about trying that just to test the waters, but I'm also, Chris, to be perfectly honest, very nervous to try it.
Oh, dude, tell me about it. Because my other podcast, the Christine show, it was Christine and I who did a show, and we did interviews together, and everything was together and everything. And when I started this show, the only reason I started the show in the first place was because people were asking me about that show. Like, how did I make that? How did I do it? How do I get recording? Like questions and things. And I was like, well, I guess I can start a second show about it. And so it was going to be a full solo show, and the very first episode I jumped in and started like just rambling and going off and just start talking and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was very nervous. I think I went through like most of my material in the first like real 5 minutes, like real fast, real fast. Yeah. And I got through it and stuff and started playing around. I think just the more you do, it's like riding a bike, man. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And the beauty about doing solo shows is what I love so much about doing them is that you can record it anytime you want, any day of the week, any time of the day. And if what I do is you can edit as you go. So if you say something that was totally like, that was dumb, I don't want to say it. You can like go back, edit, chop it out, and start over right from that take, and then stitch it all together at the end. Or you can do it all in one shot and edit later, however you want to do it. But I like to kind of, because I'll say things and I'll be like, that was so stupid. Why did I say that? I'll go back, I'll cut that part out and just do that line right over again, as if nobody even knew it even happened. And that way, because you can't really do that like in an interview style show.
Yeah.
Like, hang on a second, Steve. Should we take that line again real quick here? No, you can't do that while you're in the middle of a conversation. So that's one thing I figured out early on when I was doing the thing myself as a solo thing, but also the fact that you can do it anytime you want. You're not related on like time zones or guest interviews or guests flaking out and all that kind of stuff. You can batch record. And I do know when we had guests on, we were constantly like, I think at one point, like we were doing one every week. So I think we had like a full month, a month and a half of like backlog of guest interviews that we're just going to release. Now, how far back do you record your guest interviews?
It varies. I love to have 3 or 4 in the queue just in case there's a flub up or I have one good to go. But sometimes it's week to week. Sometimes I'll have like 2 or 3 cancellations, and then I'll have one Saturday and it's supposed to go Wednesday, and that's it. So if this one doesn't get, if I don't have this, if I don't get this done, then I won't have anything. And very rarely have I had to like, do an encore episode or whatever. But yeah, it can vary. I try to have 3 or 4 in the can.
Okay. Yeah, I knew a guy that had, I thought he said he had like 50 or 60 in the can.
Oh my gosh.
Because he was doing like 3
Awesome.
3 or 4 interviews a week. And if you do a weekly episode, it just stacks up. It stacks up. And I think he was telling me his guests were telling him like, "Where's my episode at? I recorded with you like a year ago. Like
next May.
Where is that episode at?" So I think he started like doubling up, like I week. And I think I saw one podcaster that was doing like all interviews. This is probably during COVID, I think. And so he had so many that he was releasing daily episodes because he's had to catch up with all the ones he had backlogged, you know? And I think the reason why people do it is because they think that now they have like a content they can keep going. So they're already kind of like future-proofing their show, thinking I can just push this to another month or 2 or 3 down the road and I'm still good to go. And they're always still chasing whatever guests they want. And sometimes, you know, sadly, they'll just take on anybody, like anybody with a pulse because, oh gosh,
I need something
for Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know, anybody that can talk about whatever, come on. But I think what happens is that if you start doing a show, like your show is all in one genre, your show is all police and police stuff. But if you have an interview show that's just interviewing rando anybody's, one day you got a doctor on, next day you got a golfer on, next day you got, just everybody and anybody. I think from a listener standpoint, I don't know how many times it's like buying a bag of potato chips, like the variety pack, you know, and you go in there but you only like Doritos. But why would you buy a whole pack of all the other nonsense stuff? But you only want the Doritos,
right?
So why buy the variety pack? I'm just going to get the Doritos off the shelf. So I think when I think of interviews that do like interview everybody, I always kind of go back to thinking about the whole variety pack. Is why would you? I mean, I know some people like that. I mean, some people, it's their thing, you know, or whatever. But I think that niching down does help because your audience is going to come in for whatever they're interested in. And if you're interviewing, you know, pro golfers and you like golf, then you're probably going to stick around with that. Versus a show interviewing, you know, a golfer one day and a doctor another day and a dentist the other day and whatever. I think that can hurt your show from a listener standpoint. I always kind of think of what the listener's journey, like why would they press play? Why would they listen? What makes them stick around? Things they're drawn into. And I know that some podcasters can get bored sticking around with the same content. So how have you been able to stick with the same theme of content and not get bored however many episodes you've been into? You've probably been to a lot of episodes by now.
Yeah, I think we're on 227, something like that. I did take a big break at one point. But I think just because of the diversity in police work of what you can talk about, because there's a tons of different specialties. There's the calls that people go on are all, it could be anything from, you know, finding a dead body in a bizarre position or helping a kid get out of a bad situation and later on being asked to go to his graduation. Like, you know what I mean? Like it is such a variety of stories that I hear that it makes it, I never know what I'm going to get when I sit down, just like signing on in the cruiser. I never know what I'm going to get when I have a guest on. So and police officers are very driven people. So a lot of them have now started companies. They have best-selling books. We can talk about that journey transitioning from police to like being an author. And that has never come up. There's always been so much to talk about with cops. And I guess I never thought about it, but now I feel really grateful for that because it really is. We never run short on stuff.
That's great. And then he said there's always a wide variety of different things, you know, like being a detective or working with canines or
SWAT
or, you know, in that kind of stuff. I think that it gives you a wide canvas of things to talk about, but you're still within that niche of police work and police type stuff. Has there ever been a guest come on that's told a story that's so crazy that you almost like wow, it just blew you away? Like things you never heard before.
Yeah, Ralph Friedman. I mean, there's been a lot, but there has been a lot. But Ralph Friedman in particular, he was the most decorated and had the most arrests of any police officer in New York City history. And he had some stories back from like I think it was the 70s, 80s when he was a cop, that he told them, and I wanted them out of my mind. I was like, dude, I mean, I could share. I don't know how PG the show is.
Well, we'll try. I call it radio friendly, you know?
Okay. Well, one of them, I'll share one of them that just was horrifying, and it's not like pervert. One of them is very perverse, like wildly perverse. I won't even touch it. But one of them, he went to an apartment and he had a standoff with a guy, and the guy was throwing knives at them and stuff. And he had from like behind a counter or wherever, and the guy had a 3-year-old girl by the arm, and he had a butcher's knife. And he was saying, if you guys come any closer, I'm going to kill her. And so they were standing there. And eventually the guy just chopped her arm off and kicked her aside. And they ended up killing the guy, and the little girl passed away. And I have little kids, so he's telling the story, and I'm like, don't want to have that in my mind. But that was like the tamer of the things he dealt with in his career, which begs the question: how did you keep your mind doing like 35 years as a New York City cop, seeing stuff like that? You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think that's every day, though. I don't think you run that stuff every day. Do you? I mean,
no.
I think events like that for a police officer, like in your best guess, how often does it happen in a person's career? Something like that crazy.
Well, in the city, I mean, you're certainly going to see, you're going to drink from a fire hose of police work. Where I work, if you work rural or even just like most police departments in the country are small towns, you will see very disturbing things, but the frequency is I think they say it's 20 or 30 fold what a normal person will see in their life.
Okay.
But it's much less than like a city. Like, did he go to a call like that every day? No. But did he go to dozens of calls like that? Yes. Which to me is insane. Even over 35 years, it's like, wow, nuts. Because most people, like if you think about it, most people don't even really anymore these days, don't even really see a dead body unless it's at like a wake or a funeral.
Oh yeah,
you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean,
in a controlled environment.
They freaked me out. I mean, I saw the dead body, and it kind of freaked me out. You know, I was on the road coming back, and I saw this guy laid on the ground, and turns out he was dead. You know, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And
totally.
But yeah. So, but that's something that for me, like I didn't want to get into that kind of field. You know, I mean, I started to a little bit back in college a long time ago, and wanted to become a detective and all that stuff, and
nice.
Going through school and all that stuff, and you know all the usual stuff you take, you know, and police training and things of that sort and all that. But I'm not in law enforcement, you know, just the opposite actually. But
good for you.
but no, I respect all that stuff, and I have high respect for anybody in military or police work and all that kind of stuff. Things they have to go through, and the things that I know the stories are crazy out there, and I think it does give you content for days, having things to talk about when it comes to law enforcement and all the crazies that are out there. I mean, now with social media being such a big component, with so many of these like behind the scenes stories, because I think one thing about your podcast is what it does with any good podcast is that it gives the listener stories and things that we normally don't have access to or hear about or see on the regular. So I think that's one good thing about having a really niche podcast, which makes a good podcast, is giving things that most people don't have access to. So I think that's probably have helped your podcast catapult into the massive success that it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? It's really helped me too with like people who are interested in like sponsoring it, you know, because if they find out I have a niche audience of just who they want, it might not be 1 million people listening, but it's, you know, I get 25 to 30,000 downloads a month, and to them, and that might, you know, that might, because I have a big back catalog and it's evergreen, so people can binge. That might dilute down to, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 listeners, something in that range. They don't really care. Like they just know how powerful podcast advertising is because you're getting right in somebody's ear. You know, they know my audience trusts me, and I actually don't take. I typically don't take sponsors that don't align with my audience, and it's helped me get some pretty good sponsorships for the show. And you know, I took a hit like we all did with that Apple.
Yeah, with the new update, they updated the Apple Podcast or Apple iTunes.
Dude, ripped the soul out of me.
And how much of a hit did you take? Because I didn't see much of a hit when I got mine, but
30%.
30% off. So those who don't know, what Apple did was that the way they used to actually count downloads, I believe that they would download the episodes that weren't listened to, or all the episodes. What happened was, I think was, if you took a break from listening to the podcast and came back to listening to the podcast, it would download all the episodes you missed, even if it was years back or whatever, I think. And that would look like, at the podcaster level, it would look like a big spike of downloads. even though just download them all to your phone, you may not even listen to them or not. Now, I think what they do is that they only play or only count the download of an episode that's actually played or at least recently downloaded. It's only going to download the most recent stuff, not your entire back catalog, if I understand correctly. Which does save the person's phone from being overclogged with a bunch of episodes they're not going to ever listen to. And then also, too, as the podcaster, or us, it actually looks more like an accurate number than a false number. I think that's what you really want in the end. I know everybody loves big numbers. Like, I love big numbers too.
Yeah.
But I think I'd rather have a more accurate number of someone who actually listens. So I see these numbers, it's like, oh, these are actual real people. These numbers actually are as close to real people as possible versus all the inflated numbers. I know I've done episodes on this before, but there are a lot of bots and a lot of podcast promoters out there that will sell you like downloads or whatever.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I think I've even had Rob from Libsyn on. We were talking about that.
I heard that one. That was a great episode.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, talking about all the fake stuff out there. Because he works with the advertisers directly selling, like, we're talking real money here.
Yeah, they investigate that stuff.
Yeah, because it's fraud. It's all fraud. It's like you're basically, getting fake numbers. Now you're going to put it in front of advertisers, say, I got this big audience.
Right.
Here, give me a sponsor, give me some money. But all that's just fake, fake stuff anyway. So
right.
I think but most indie podcasters aren't even at a level to even think about getting your traditional like ads and sponsors. But there are some sponsors that will work with much smaller audiences if the podcast is niche enough and that the actual like the audience would actually use and appreciate the product and things of that sort. So it's not always like, they say like, oh, I don't have enough downloads to get a sponsor. You can try somebody a little smaller and just see. Yeah. But also at the end of the day, you also have to deliver too. So if a sponsor pays you money to talk about their product and the sponsor gets absolutely no return on investment, they may not want to
they may not re-up.
Right. So you have to kind of think about those things too. So, but I had a guest on not long ago and he was telling me that the only way to make only make money from a podcast is to have your listeners buy something. Whether it's something you sell or something an advertiser that sells, through your podcast, is that your listeners are physically buying something. And I did hear that podcast listeners, audio podcast listeners, have more buying power than YouTube viewers or TikTok watchers or Instagram Reel watchers. Because you think about the demographic that watches a lot of YouTube and Instagram and TikTok. Usually it's younger people, just bored, doom scrolling, things like that. But with an audio podcast, you're more invested. You're usually busier people are kind of running around doing stuff while you're listening. Because I know when I listen, I'm working. I'm physically I'm doing something. I'm actually working. But if I was unemployed and I was sitting at home all day, you just like looking at your phone, scrolling through stuff, whatever. I mean, that's fun. You get the eyeballs, but people who are unemployed usually don't have any money.
Yeah, exactly.
So good luck selling them anything. So what are some big products that you've sold on your show? Like, I mean, other than like the regular generic ads, but like things that sponsor wise that you've like mentioned on your show.
I had a startup holster company, Avid Holsters. Come on.
That makes sense. Makes sense for your show. Yeah,
totally. And he gave me the schematics for it and the whole thing. They were in production and I saw what it could do. It could unclip from your holster and like clip into your car or clip into something called a lockbox. Wow, it's an ingenious idea. So neat. And paid me up front for I think 3 months. And then the guy's the nicest guy in the world too. And it just didn't launch. It was a disaster because I was putting a link to pre-order in my podcast and people were going to his site and then he never launched the holster. I was like,
what?
Brother, this is not good for my credibility. And, like I said, he has a full-time job. He got into engineering this thing. He hired people to help, put all of his own money into it, bought ad space with me, and then nothing. So that was the last time I had like a pretty legit sponsor. I've had one-offs from a guy who was a fan of the show who was worked for like a headhunting company and something to do with, I think they had insurance for law enforcement or something. And he just loved the show and was like, hey, I just want to give you, he's like, I'll just give you like $450 and just give us a little ad on your next episode. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty easy to do, you know?
Yeah,
Now,
that happened one time.
did you have like contracts written out or anything written down in paper, like agreements, or is it all like a verbal handshake kind of thing?
Just email. It was all email. And I actually have one right now. I had a huge one in the books for last summer, and it was with AT&T FirstNet, because that's for first responders.
Oh.
And they came in and they said, we have a bunch of ad money. Like, I got emailed by an agency representing them. And they're like, we have a bunch of ad money. We want to hit podcasts. We want to spread it out. Like, they weren't looking for giant podcasts. They were looking like for podcasts in the field and kind of spreading it out. They wanted to know my numbers and everything else. And I was talking with friends about it, and they were like, guys in the industry and entertainment, and they're like, AT&T has money and they want to spend it on your show. They're like, tell them you'll integrate, you'll put a link, you'll do social media posts. You will, if they have if they have someone who works there that actually will be a good police guest with stories, you will invite that person on the show. So I did the whole thing. I typed up this whole thing. It was going to be $5,500 a month for 6 months.
Wow.
Which is enormous, way more money than I would normally get. And they were like, yep. I gave them the options. One of them, the lowest one was like $2,200. The highest one was like $5,500. I heard back 2 weeks later. Yep. Legal's writing it up right now. Excited to work with you. Yada, yada. Great. Email a week later. It's almost finished. Can't wait to get started. Okay, great. Now we're running into fall. I reach out and go, what's up? I've already spent this money in my mind. I'm like,
yeah, of course.
I'm like, I'm going to be rich, baby. So I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, oh yeah, there was, the campaign is kind of stalled a little bit, and we're kind of looking at it now. And I'm like, weird. So I actually end up going on FirstNet's, all their social media, and they have like no followers. They do no ad. Like, there's nothing going with FirstNet. Like, they never started. So then at this point, I'm kind of like, the wind is out of my sails. I'm like, this ain't happening. It ain't happening. And sure enough, I reached out 3 weeks later, and I never heard from them again.
Oh, man.
They lost the whole campaign went away, and they just didn't do it. But I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah,
But,
it could happen with anything, really. I mean, even a smaller company or a smaller, somebody says they have a startup, something or other, they want to advertise in your show to get their thing launched, like you said with the holster thing, and things could, nothing could happen out of that too. It's one of those things where it's a business. I mean, you think about it. I mean, podcasting, it's kind of like a business where you have to kind of, see what happens out there, and
Yep.
it's like sales, I guess. If you're in sales, it's commission. You sell, you make good money. You don't. There's good months, bad months. It's kind of the way it goes. And I know that you do run a lot of regular ads on your show. Do you make money off of those, or are they just kind of part of the thing, or what?
Yeah, Chris, recently it has, I don't know if they changed the formula. I'm hoping they didn't make a mistake, but my payouts the last 2 months have been almost double. So when I was at the height, pre-Apple adjusting the downloads, I had 1 month where I was like 41,000. I was just going up and up, 41,000 downloads in a month. I was like, damn, this is getting good. And then it just, from December 2023, every month it stepped down. And then just recently, the new iPhone came out and it went another drop. I'm like, whoa. And then I'm like, everybody got the new iPhone, updated their apps, probably updated the podcast app. And that was because at the beginning of that happening, I thought I was just stinky. I was like, oh my gosh, it's happening. I stink and I'm losing everybody. I even thought about like, if this gets like really, really bad, I'm just going to stop doing it, because I'm not going to sit here and watch this thing sink and crash and burn, because the podcast is going down. But then I listened to, I forget who it was. I wish I could give you credit, but I didn't know about you yet. I listened to somebody and they were like, go look at your followers on Spotify and Apple Podcast Connect, not just Libsyn. Look at your followers and listeners and see if those have gone down. And all those were still going up. And I'm like, wait a second. I am gaining. This is just aftermath of the Apple thing is going down and down. So I was kind of dealing with that. Chris, forgive me. I'm still getting over a cold. What was the original question?
Well, I know that you had a lot of those other advertisers and you had the small, you had the regular, the regular,
AdSense,
the ones that you don't actually create, the sponsors that you don't like, not the ad, like the top dog, I guess, of the advertisers in podcasting would be the ones that you physically read on the air, like the actual, like the one I do for Riverside and things like that. And then down below, the very bottom would be the ones that are already like the radio commercials, I would call them. They're just throw it in there in random places throughout your podcast. Those like the radio commercial ones. I see a lot of podcasters throw those in there, and you have them too. How are they working out for you as a podcaster? Like you said, the numbers were they were up, they're going back down, but then the numbers you said actually for the payout on those doubled. You're trying to figure out why.
Yes. So I use Libsyn AdvertiseCast, I think, or they bought AdvertiseCast. Now it's Libsyn Ads.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was like the $300 to $500 range, which was like, believe me, phenomenal to me. It's like I'm flapping my gums 4 episodes a month. I never thought this podcast would make a dime. I'm making $300 to $500.
That's incredible by itself. That's a lot, dude.
Yeah. I thought it was amazing. So it's a car payment, So that was happening. Like 1 month it would be like 246, and then another month would be like 472. And they tell you the impressions. It'd be like, and sometimes it doesn't line up. They'll be like 120,000 impressions because I think they're counting each ad I put in, and I do beginning, middle, end. So that's 3 per episode. So it's 3 impressions per episode. So it started to kind of just stick around 300 to 500, sometimes a low 246, 245. I remember those numbers because I was like, what happened? But sometimes the ad impressions were higher and I got paid less. So I was like, what is their formula? Like, I don't get it. So then the last 2 months, it was $730, like 722 and 730. And I looked at it and I had 122,000 in the 120s. And I got paid over $700 each month for those. And I looked back and I wanted to see, well, what was the most I got paid ever before this? And the most I got paid ever before this was like $620. And it was for like 100 and 105 or 103 impressions. So I don't know what they're doing or why they're paying me. Like, it seems like a lot more for impressions, but they are. I don't know if they changed things up or if maybe my downloads maybe there's more. I don't know if they actually listen and see how much people listen and people are listening to the ads longer. Like, I don't know what formula they use or what technology. Can they only tell if someone listens to the episode, or can they actually, does a podcast episode report back, hey, they listened to the pre-roll and the whole mid-roll? Is that worth more?
Are they inserting the ads, or are you okay? How does the ad physically get into your podcast?
I pick where it goes. So they give you your waveform when you're editing your podcast, and I go beginning, end, and then I find a spot in the middle that's like a good time to have an ad. And excuse me, I choose to put it in there. I have no control on what it is, but I mean, it could be an anti-cop ad. I have no control. It goes right in the middle. And I told my audience that before, because they'd be like, hey, there was an ad on your podcast that like actually aligns with values of your listeners.
Interesting.
And
I've heard stories about that too, where like, your podcast be with something like I mean, you could have a true crime podcast and be something completely different. Like, I don't know, maybe about a Barbie toy or something. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I thought you could pick like the type of ads that you want in those programmatic things. I've never done it, but I guess it sounds like from what you're telling me, you don't have a choice of that. They just throw whatever in there.
Yeah. And they'll do local stuff too. Like there'll be a local insurance agency from Massachusetts. I think they do by locality a little bit.
Yeah, they know exactly where the episode's being played in or downloaded in or whatever. But with VPNs and things like that, it can be a little tricky these days. But I've heard that too. I've heard a podcast once, and they're playing a local commercial to me. I'm like, what? How's that work?
Yeah, Bob's Hardware Store. You're like, I know Bob.
Right. Like, well, how's this podcast that's based in like Texas? How are they do commercial for me? But it's all this programmatic stuff. It's all based on location, and they figure all that stuff out, which actually works out great if you're doing like stand-up events, like you're a stand-up comedian, and you're like doing like a coming soon to your town, you do a commercial for the town, and you can have it set to that town, wherever that town is.
For the person buying the ad. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, say like, I'm going to be in that town this weekend or whatever. So only episodes that are downloaded in that town play that ad. And that way they hear it and it makes sense. Well, you're doing a fantastic job with your podcast, man. Like you are like literally crushing on. You're making money. You have lots of downloads. That's the thing too. Some of these podcasters, I swear to God, they say like, dude, if I only can get 2,000 downloads an episode or 5,000 downloads, or 10,000 downloads. And I always say to them, then what? Like, what are you going to do with those downloads? Having numbers are great, but if you have no plan for it, then what are you going to do? So when it comes to your podcast, At what point did you realize you could actually make some money with this thing?
I think when I have a Patreon too, which I hesitated to start for years because like I said, I consume a lot of podcast strategy stuff. And the kind of the vibe I was getting was like, don't be one of these people that like starts a podcast and a Patreon with it. Because you're just going to be like disappointed because the love someone has to have for your show to actually monthly give you money is not going to be there for a long time. Like, don't just be like, podcast one, here's my Patreon.
Right.
Who would do that?
Yeah.
Like, nobody will do that. So I waited like 4 years to start the Patreon. And it was pretty slow to start, but now it's up to, I get like $540 a month from that.
Wow.
And I get, now the last 2 months, I've been getting $700 from the advertised cast. And so when I look at them together now, the last few months, I'm like, wow, that's like almost a mortgage payment.
That's crazy. That's great, dude. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, I'm so happy with it.
That is incredible. I know that if you can at least make what you spent into the podcast back, I think that's a success story on its own. But to make that and then some, that's incredible. Do you ever thought about, I know it's probably too early now to actually quit your regular job and to go podcasting full time?
Brother, I think about it every day. Every day, my man. I did actually, it's funny. There's been so many blips where, like, believe it or not, because of the podcast, I got on TV. I did a full season on Discovery ID for a show called Exposed Naked Crimes.
Oh, I know that. I've seen that series.
Yeah. It's a glorified clip show. But anyways, they chose me to be on it. And of course, my chief right away is like, you got the podcast. Now you're going on TV. Like, before you know it, you're going to be, you're going to get enough money and you won't be a cop anymore. And again, I'm like, I would never do that. In my head, I'm like, I would do that so fast.
Oh, I'm the same way too, man. I'm the same way too. But now, at what point do you automatically tell your chief and everyone you work with? Do you tell them that you had a podcast, or do you kind of keep it secret for a while and then tell them?
Yeah, I kind of kept it secret for a while, but at the same time, I didn't hide it. Like, and my chief now actually joined as a Patreon supporter for a year. So
he's definitely in it now. Yeah.
That's the best endorsement you can get, and be like, well, he supported it. So I don't really talk about it a lot. I have buddies in the field that are like huge fans of it, and they will tell more people than I tell. I might, like, if I have a roadwork detail with like a bunch of construction guys, I might give them some TPS stickers and be like, hey, I got a podcast, so and they always think it's neat, But I don't talk about it that much at work. At this point, everybody knows. And they might ask like, hey, you got any interesting guests coming up? Or like, oh, I can't believe you had so-and-so on. But I did. It was a slow burn. I didn't go right in and start with it. I kind of just, I let it kind of come up slowly. You know what I mean?
Right. Like with my podcast, everybody knows I have a podcast. Everybody in the corporate space of my company, they know I have a podcast. I work for a major company, and they all kind of know and that kind of stuff. And I don't try to like I don't mention the name of the company I work for on the podcast or other podcasts, things like that. I kind of keep that secret. But everybody kind of knows what kind of job I do, but I try to keep that stuff secret, it's kind of secret, not secret, but kind of keep it separated, I guess. Kind of separate,
sure,
like church and state, kind of keep things separated or whatever,
Right.
That's kind of the way when it comes to the podcast. Well, Steve, man, this has been so fantastic, man, having you on the show today, man. I really appreciate you and your show and your amazing stuff you do, and being such a great like beacon of hope for all of us regular indie podcasters out here, man. It's been so great, man.
Oh, thanks, Brad. It was an honor. I'm a fan, brother. I'm a fan of Podtastic, so it's an honor to come on.
Yeah, this is great. So where can everybody find out all about your podcast and all your wonderful stuff?
There is a website, thingspleasesee.com. If you go down there and scroll down, all the episodes are right there in a little window. I'm on Instagram at thingspleasesee. And of course, every podcast platform you can think of, I think, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Overcast, all those wonderful podcast apps, I'm on there. So, and if reach out and say hi if you come over from Podtastic. Love to hear from you.
Wow, that was great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for stopping by today, man. I really do appreciate you and your podcast and all your great words of wisdom and having a super niche podcast, something you can't hear anywhere else, giving stories that you really can't hear anywhere else. That is what it's all about. And I've said this once, and I'll say it again, having really unique stories that you can share on your podcast. Hey, if you're willing to share them, I know some like some personal stories we don't want to really share with everybody, you know what I'm saying? But if you have really good stories that you can't hear anywhere else, it makes for a really good podcast, even if it's a really niche down podcast. And Steve is a major, really good example of that happening with his podcast, making killer money, getting amazing numbers of downloads. People are loving it with lots of reviews. Last I checked, he had over 1,000 reviews on Apple. That's incredible. So if you're thinking that your small little podcast isn't amount to nothing because you're not broad, you don't talk about, everything and anything under the sun like some of the bigger name shows do, but there's power with having a niche podcast, especially as an indie podcaster. And I hope that this year, 2025, is going to be your year to take your podcast to the next level. And until that happens, I am here for you on your podcasting journey. And until next time, happy podcasting.